All right, so we do not have a chapter specifically for today's class. I guess I kind of drew that short straw to do the review, but hopefully we can all get something from this morning. I do want to begin by saying thank you. It's been a pleasure being able to be here and teach for you guys. Hopefully, again, you all were able to gain some bit of resources, tools, some knowledge from the book. And I will speak on behalf of Matthew and Jeremy. I think you've been a great class, good participants, and we appreciate all of you all for being attentive and being here. As I said, we are going to be going through a review. There is a part in the last section of the book that is titled The Conclusion. It kind of goes through a little bit of the individual parts of the book. There are 4 parts, as we all know, with 3 chapters for each of those parts. And on page 7, you will be able to find the outline for the book. I definitely advise that we use this outline if there are particular times that a particular chapter might be more beneficial than another. Definitely look at page 7, find the chapter, and review through that. So the conclusion is basically an outline, like I said, for the parts that the author has titled the Peacemakers Pledge. The first pledge, or the first part, is called to glorify, or we are called to glorify God, which asks, how can I please and honor God in this situation? In the situation of a conflict, in a situation of resolution, how can we as a Christian glorify God in this situation? In 1 Corinthians 10:31, Paul writes to that church there, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to glorify God. So, hoping to get a little bit of conversation started, I wanted to ask, how can we glorify God through conflict? Is it possible, I guess, first? It is. I see heads nodding. How can we? How do we? Yeah. Definitely, right? How we handle the conversation, how we handle the conflict, our demeanor, what we do, what we say. Very good. Anything else? Mm-hmm. Being obedient, right? Yeah, I think it's a really good point, for sure. I didn't know you were going with that one. I thought you were going to do his sin with Bathsheba and how he was sorrowful, you know the word, for that sin, but that's a really good point as well. David is, obviously, the example of David is numerous. Anything else? So yeah, I think everything that was said obviously is right. As a biblical peacemaker, we must be motivated by a desire to bring honor to God, revealing the same love and grace as Jesus Christ did for us. When we respond to conflicts in a loving way, by not sinning, being rash, or succumbing to our selfish intentions, we can show God's character and ultimately we can show Jesus Christ in our lives. So the second part or pledge is for us to get the log out of our or your eye. The question that's asked is, how can I show Jesus work in me by taking responsibility for my contribution to this conflict? And in Matthew 7, verses 4 through 5, Jesus teaches us by saying, how can you say to your brother, Let me take the speck out of your eye when there is a log in your own eye. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So here, when we honestly admit our own faults, and when we forgive or overlook others, there's a chapter about overlooking others' minor offenses, then hopefully others will respond in kind. I personally love this part of the book. I personally think I got the most out of this section of the book, these 3 chapters, which are titled, Is It Really Worth Fighting Over? Conflict Starts in the Heart, and Confession Brings Freedom. I think as a true peacemaker, it all starts with us, right? We talked about how we glorify God by our actions and how we approach the situation. But I think if we ourselves are in a right state of mind, we understand that, we have to take care of our faults first. Then we can go and talk to the other person and hopefully get them to also see, I guess, the faults or the conflict and hopefully get to a resolution. Any comments with these 2 parts? Yes. Great point. Yes. That's obviously like the point, right? That's probably one of the best points of the Bible, right? Is Jesus died for us. We need to show that same care, that same gift that he showed for us. That's wonderful. Yes. Definitely. That's obviously Jesus was smart, right? So he knew what he was saying, obviously, whenever he said this, and I totally agree with that. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you, guys. The next part of the pledge is to gently restore. This asks, how can I lovingly serve others by helping them take responsibility for their contribution to the conflict? This is tough. This is a difficult thing to do in a loving and caring way, but obviously as Christians, we are told throughout the entire Bible that we must do this. In Galatians 6, Paul writes, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. And I, again, think that this ties back to getting the log, this verse, Galatians 6:1, ties back to getting the log out of your first eye by telling us we must first be spiritual, or, those who are spiritual. But we're all spiritual here. We're all Christians. So in that regard, when others fail to see their contributions to a conflict, we do, as Christians, need to sometimes graciously show them their fault. And obviously, from time to time, that might not work. You as an individual, going to that person and talking to them and trying to come to some sort of resolution. So this book also gives some good tips, and obviously the Bible does as well, that, we sometimes need to bring others with us, whether that is an elder or a respected friend or any type of counselor, or somebody, obviously, like it says, somebody who's objective to the situation, who can see both sides and then come to a conclusion, hopefully, and help that problem. But I want to ask, what happens if this doesn't even work? What if you go to the individual, it doesn't work out, you bring somebody else, you bring an elder, you bring Phil, that doesn't work out, what happens then? That's right. That's exactly right. Yes. Phrase it again. If we go to an individual and that we're in conflict with, whether that's a Christian or non-Christian, but I mean in this case we'll say it's a Christian, and you bring an elder or you bring a friend that's really respected, objective opinions, right, with this person that you bring, and that individual that you're in conflict with, you yourself want to resolve the conflict. You want to ask for forgiveness, you want to seek forgiveness, you want to give forgiveness, but this other person just doesn't. This other person is basically too hurt, maybe, whatever the situation is. What do we do as a Christian in that circumstance? And I think that's right. I mean, obviously there's more to it. There's more to it than just leaving it in God's hand, but sometimes that is the case. Family, right? Like I've mentioned before, I have a sister who's fallen away, and it's hard, but, after you pray and you continuously pray, I think that's obviously another point to do is to pray and ask God to help this situation. Sometimes you just have to cut ties and leave it in God's hands. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but sometimes, unfortunately, you will. Perry, did you have something? Yeah. Just be completely blunt and honest, right? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is you, and it's you bring up another good point because the book obviously has certain, I guess, ways, actions that we can follow, and that was one of those ways is by telling stories, using Bible verses to kind of show that person, hey, this is what the Bible says, not to be in an arrogant way, right, but in a loving and kind way. I think, Nathan was a great example of that for David. Yeah. Give that to the other person. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, and I think that's a good point. And obviously, we've talked about overlooking minor offenses, right? And that's not really minor, in my opinion. But obviously, she was willing to try to save her child's life in that circumstance and be loving. But then, obviously, Solomon realized, who the true mother was. But yeah, sometimes overlooking these minor offenses is biblical and is the right thing to do. But sometimes, and probably most of the time, after things build up, overlooking isn't, the necessary or the right action in that aspect. Yes. Mm-hmm. Jokingly, yeah, trying to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we all fall into that sometimes, and it's tough, right? And all we can do is prepare And well, it's one of the last things we're going to look at is prepare for those situations rather than jumping in and saying, hey, we need to resolve this, or, like you said, I caught you and now you need to, do X, Y, and Z. That's not always the best case, but I'm sure that as we read this book, we learn more and better ways of approaching the situations. Yeah. hmm Yep. It is. And that's obviously the last thing we as Christians want to ever do, right? Is to cause somebody to stumble that far away from their relationship with God. And again, this book actually goes through examples like that. And really, we're going to get to it after this next part. But that slippery slope that we're going to talk about here in a minute, I think the last piece to the slippery slope before we slip into the attack responses is called accountability, and that's a biblical practice that we are called to do with some Christians whenever they're in that situation. We hold them accountable for their sins in hope that they seek repentance ultimately. But again, as we try to prepare ourselves to approach the situation, whether that is love, obviously we always need to be loving, but we're told to rebuke as well. And sometimes that rebuke can be a little bit more stern, like you were saying, depending on the situation. Good comments. Yes, I saw Pam's first. I'm sorry. All right. Are you sure? All right, Terry. hmm 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 With resolving. Oh, totally. Yeah, that's very good comment. And again, yes. I mean, the book it explains all of that in a very more in-depth way, but I think Terry hit the nail on the head where, time heals all things. I know in particular situations that I've been in, you ask for forgiveness and then you're like, you need to forgive me right now, right? But really, sometimes it's not that way, and it takes time. The other person needs to feel, that they've had an opportunity to address the situation, think about the situation, and give them enough time. Yes. hmm Yeah. Exactly. No, great point. Obviously, that story, lots of stories of the Old Testament are very well understanding for these kinds of points, for taking time to gently restore others because, as Christians, or I guess not as Christians, as humans, sometimes being rash is our first instinct, right? Is just attacking, right? But obviously, the more that we can lament and think on things, the more understanding our end result will be, right? So I think everyone has had wonderful comments. Is there anything else? Did you want to say what you wanted to say? Uh-huh. I hear you accidentally, yeah. Uh-huh. I could not see that happening, but yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. A gentle nuts, right? Yeah, yeah. I understand. Yeah, it definitely is our demeanor, and we talked about getting the log out of our own eye, right? I mean, we have to think through before we go and talk to somebody about a particular issue, whether it's spending too much money or actually saying something that was hurtful. On the other side, we always need to make sure that we're praying to God and asking for His wisdom in our approach to other people. So yeah, good job, Perry. I know that's how you approached it. No, well, oh my God. So Phil is 2 spots back. I love you guys. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Here. Yeah, and that's a good point. And actually, I think that ties into 1 Corinthians as well. Whenever they're actually taking their problems outside of the church, right? I think Paul and obviously Jesus teaches that it's better for Christians to fix the problems within the church first, and obviously it's and as far as it goes. So if the sin is great, then obviously there's more rebuke and there's more resolution that's needed. But hopefully we can keep it in the church. That's a good point. Anything else? All right, good comments, guys. So the final part is of this Peacemaker pledge. And I've lost my section. All right. Is to go and be reconciled. And as you can see, the question here is, how can I demonstrate the forgiveness of God and encourage a reasonable solution to this conflict? In Matthew 5, I have 24, but starting in verse 23, Jesus preaches from the Sermon on the Mount saying, "So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift." So, is it working? Okay. So I said, when we forgive others, as Jesus has forgiven us, and we seek solutions that satisfy ours, not only ours, but the others' interests as well, hopefully the conflict can be cleared away and peace can be restored. So this is the final part of the Peacemakers Pledge, the final 3 chapters. I'm going to move on. We only have 15 minutes left to the next part. Does anybody else have anything they want to comment on before I move away from this Peacemakers pledge? Yes. I don't care. No. Please ask. Uh-oh. Well, should Jeremy be here for this? Okay. Okay. Good, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're not as close, I guess you could say. Yeah. That's a great question. Is anyone more knowledgeable than me want to respond to that? I think that's a very good question. Yeah, of course. No, you're good. Please. Not at all. Not at all. No, you're great. Please. Oh, no. Maybe you should be. Yeah. Good response. Thank you. No, thank you. That's great. I think time obviously is we've talked about it a lot this morning, and it can be the answer. And hopefully in the end, years from now or however long it takes, you and whoever the person is with any of these situations. I know I've been in situations, in the same situations, and I hope to gain that trust back because that's what it is. Is gaining that trust. Anything else before we move on? All right, thank you guys. So, we've seen this before. This is on page 22 of the book. This is known as the slippery slope. Ken Sandy came up with this slippery slope. I think it's a really good representation of where we can fall in our actions and responses to conflict and in peacemaking. This is, like I said, on page 22, which is chapter 1, titled Conflict Provides Opportunities. And then in the appendix B, Alternative Ways to Resolve Disputes is the title of that appendix. It goes through in some summary for a few of the responses, not all of them, but a few of them. I wanted to let you all know that is another good resource if you do have other questions or want to just look up more information on them. But going through the slippery slope, the first section, which is on the, I guess, what was that? The left side, right? Yes, the escape responses on the left side. We find denial, flight, and then ultimately suicide. The author also calls these responses peace faking. And these responses occur when someone is more interested in avoiding a conflict rather than resolving it. So by denying it and leaving the situation and not ever coming back to it. I wanted to ask, are these responses easy to fall into? And do we see pitfalls from these responses? And what pitfalls might those be? So denying a conflict ever has even happened, leaving and flying away from the conflict, and then we obviously know that suicide is sinful and something we totally want to avoid. But what about those other two? Is it easy to sometimes fall in the denial portion of these responses? I see no heads nodding, so maybe it's not, which is great. Yes. Yes. That was what I was going for. I sometimes fall into the denial portion a lot of the times, right? You don't really want to cause more conflict, so it's like, you know what? I'll just not talk about it at all, right? And then sometimes I'll shut down. Just giving my brief, I guess, example. I shut down and I won't want to approach the situation. I'll just basically ignore it for as long as I can. Unfortunately, and that obviously is not right, because what does that do? What are some pitfalls that can occur? Yeah. Big one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. And at any moment, that Christmas bill might be brought up again, right? So if you overlook it, which you didn't, and you approached it the right way, I'm sure, then it could bring up other conflicts. And I'm not trying to bring light to that, so I apologize. But exactly, resentment is going to be buried in there somewhere. And this again, this kind of teeters the line of overlooking and denial, right? I think when we think about overlooking, we don't want to think about overlooking it if it's not a feeling of resentment. If you have a feeling of resentment, then you're denying that feeling. If you're overlooking something, then it's basically like, you know what, that didn't really hurt me. It didn't really hurt our relationship. I'm just going to overlook it, right? Like, there's a big difference there, and we have to find that line. Yeah. There you go. Oh, yeah. Hmm. Exactly, and that's where bringing somebody with you might be helpful in those situations. Having a mediator, right? Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that's a phenomenal point, and I have that too, right? So if you're in this part of the pie graph or the chart, and you're denying somebody's faults, you too are then sinning, right? I mean, if you know somebody's living in sin and you're like, I'm just going to overlook it, or not overlook it, I'm going to deny it and fly from it, then you're actually a part of that sin by not helping them, by not doing what Jesus taught us in Matthew 5, by laying, the gift at the altar and going and talking to that person. So that's a really good point there. Thank you. You had something. You're good. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, and again, those family situations are definitely. I mean, I'm in similar situations as well, right? And they are very hard, unfortunately. Again, I do think this book covers a lot of those situations very very well, where we can use the resources. And really, we're going to go to the peacemaker portion. Hopefully, we have 5 minutes that'll help us understand what can we do in the response to that, right? To a family member or a friend who may be disrespecting somebody else. I think the center responses really will help out, hopefully, with that situation. Does anyone want to add to that, or just in general? All right, so hopefully, as we move on, we'll find something. But if we want to talk afterwards, definitely we'll do that. So the next was the attack responses, and those are going to be on the right side of the graph. Those included assault, litigation, and then ultimately murder. These responses, as you can see, are when someone is more interested in winning a conflict rather than preserving the relationship, right? So we see people assaulting, and when I say assault, I don't just mean physically. I mean, this can be mentally as well, even spiritually, I guess, right? Whenever you're assaulting the other person's faith or whatever. So I do think that, or I know that, when someone is more interested in just being on top, being the dominant person, controlling the situation, then they're falling more into these responses. They see conflict rather than an opportunity. Like we try to see the conflict as opportunities. As Christians, we want to make sure that we're glorifying God in every approach to a conflict, but these people might see a conflict as a contest and a way, like I said, to control others and bring on pressure to the other person. And it's definitely something that we want to avoid, attacking the other person personally and mentally. And really, if that is something that you're faced with, then we'll move into the peacemaking responses. And we have less than 5 minutes, so I'll rush through these. So these responses were overlook, reconciliation, negotiation, mediation, arbitration, and then finally accountability. So I said first that these responses are commanded by God. Obviously, this is in these sections of that chart, we will find ourselves to be more spiritually minded and following the commandments that God has set out for us. They're empowered by the gospel. We can find these all in the gospel, in the Bible. They're all biblical, and they are directed toward finding a just and mutually agreeable solution to our conflicts. So the first three responses are called personal peacemaking, and again, those were overlooking, reconciliation, and negotiation. And the second three, mediation, arbitration, and accountability, are assisted peacemaking. It's a simple question, but why? Why are the first three personal and the last three assisted? Exactly, right? So we can individually, personally overlook a conflict, and we can reconcile a conflict personally, and then we can hopefully one-on-one negotiate a conflict. But then when a conflict gets too far to where someone is blatantly trying to deny the conflict or attack a conflict, being on both sides of the chart, we'll hopefully be able to bring in somebody to mediate, arbitrate, and then ultimately hold them accountable for those actions in a conflict. And then finally, and again, I did want to say that assisted peacemaking is biblical. It is a very helpful resource, and it's sometimes necessary to resolving conflict. I don't want anyone to think that if you're in a conflict with somebody at church or in your personal life, that your only option is yourself, right? We all are here together and we're unified, and God wants us to stay unified. And to do that, sometimes we have to use our brethren and our help that we have here to be able to figure out solutions to our conflicts with other people. So I'm going to end on that. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we bring this to a close? All right, guys, I just want to say thank you. It's been wonderful teaching you all and talking with you all. Next quarter, which starts next Sunday, I haven't been here in a couple of weeks, so please don't quiz me because I don't remember what those are, but I'm sure we'll be talking about those a little bit more today. So anyway, you all have a good New Year and a good rest of your service today. Thank you.